Alright, Boo-Boo. You ready for this? You ready to do this? Oh, good boy. Bring it here. Good boy. Oh, good boy. Bring it here. Bring it here. Right. Good boy. Bring it here. Bring it here. Good boy. Good boy. Good boy. Good. Oh, good boy. Good boy. Good boy. I'm Roland Hearn, and this is A Walk in the Garden. Well, today I am back in the original garden. Well, not the original garden, but my original garden. And this is the 25th episode of A Walk in the Garden. So that means that next week is 6 months of these videos. And I'm going to wrap up next week the series on shame. But today I'm going to lay the final piece of the foundation for that video next week. So today I'm going to look at how we can tell whether or not we're responding to shame, give some characteristics of the way that we respond to shame, and then I'm going to speak about, or maybe I'll do this first, 5 types of shame. So try 5 scenarios of shame that will help us to try and identify where shame might be at work in our life, or where it's coming from. So I decided that I would just do that here at home, and then next week, I haven't yet decided where I'll be next week, but next week will be the 26th video, and I'll wrap up this piece of the process, this series on shame. Let's get going, shall we? Well, I hope you enjoyed that little catch up with Boo as much as I enjoyed giving it. He's doing pretty well with catching a frisbee. So let me introduce you to these 5 contexts of shame. Again, I have to thank Neil Pembroke for helping me discover these. These are drawn primarily from the work of Stephen Patterson, and these are also reflected in the work of people like James Fowler and Donald Capps in a classic book called The Depleted Self. The first of these contexts for shame is what is called situational shame. So that's the shame that a person might have to deal with just because they've found themselves in a situation where, like I said last week, they're feeling exposed, or they want to hide, or they are feeling like they're inadequate or inappropriate. So that's situational shame. Again, it might be that type of thing where you've turned up to do something, and you find out that your expectation of what's going to happen is very different from what is happening, and you're embarrassed and overwhelmed by that situation. So the second one is aesthetic shame. It's that I don't look right. It's, at a very mild level, it's that, I can't go out looking like this. Or it might also be someone who has a disfigured face, somebody that's perhaps been in a car accident, had scarring on their face, and they don't want people looking at them. The face is very much a location of shame. And so if we have disfigurement on our face, we can very often be struggling with shame over that disfigurement. Aesthetic shame. I don't look right. The third one, inherited identity shame. This is the shame that goes along with the people that I come from. So it might be the shame that a person has to endure when they hear the comment, "You come from the wrong side of the tracks." Might have that socio-economic piece. Might also be found being delivered in racial slurs and those kinds of situations. And so a person struggling with shame in that space has to wrestle for identifying themselves as valuable despite their family or place of origin. The one that we have all struggled with at one time or another, I'm sure, is inferiority shame. I'm less than those around me or those I'm in relationship with. I'm not good enough. Most of us can identify with that feeling at one time or another. And the last one is called the moral shame. It's the shame that is attached to acting in ways that are inappropriate, that have an ethical component to it. Some would suggest that this is the redeeming feature of shame, and it's the role that shame plays in society by attaching to actions that are morally or ethically inappropriate. And so it forms a barrier for societies against acts that are inappropriate for their communities. So what kind of actions might reflect that we're struggling or dealing with shame? I think this is probably one of the spaces that can be most helpful for us. So let me demonstrate for you that which is almost always associated with shame. If you see what I'm about to show you now, you are either dealing with shame, or if you're watching somebody else do this, they are dealing with shame. Here it is. It's that head hanging down in response to the circumstances of which I'm in. Oh, I just messed up. Oh, I can't believe I did that. Oh no, here comes... Oh, I didn't remember I had to do that. See how the head goes down? That's always a sign of shame. And it's across cultures. And it has this long historical reality, and you can see in ancient writings this idea of hanging the head down. So another thing that we will often do is make excuses. So somebody says, "Did you do such and such?" Or "Why didn't you do such and such?" Most of us find it very difficult to just give a straight out reason, particularly if it makes us look bad. That's the shame element. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're making excuses and they're overflowing, so there's a difference between an excuse and an explanation, but the need to be excused in a circumstance or as a result of a failure, that's shame. Another one that's closely associated with that, that you'll often see, and most people don't recognize it as shame, is over-explaining things. So I might say to someone, can you help me carry this bag? Maybe that's not a good example. Let me try to think of something else. But anyway, a request for assistance in a task. And then immediately the explanation of the importance of the task, what will happen if they don't perform the task, how they will feel if they don't perform the task. Help me with this or you're going to feel terrible about yourself. That's a shame construct, clearly. But the issue here is that what's going on inside of us is that if I ask somebody to do something for me, in and of myself, there is not enough reason for them to do that, so I've got to explain why it's important. I've either got to raise the level of the task or increase the consequences if the task is not performed. Watch out for that one. It's a tricky one. Another one that is not often identified is the person that overworks themselves. The workaholic. This is often associated with shame, or it flows very quickly from shame, because it is that idea that I have to work really, really hard in order to be acceptable by a group of people, or by a company, or by my family. In and of itself, my presence is not enough, and so I have to do more in order to be good enough. One that goes into that same space is the need to manipulate people. And so anytime somebody is manipulating somebody else, shame is going to be involved. So it's giving expressions in a way that would make a person feel bad if they didn't perform that which you should, that they should do. Should is a key word. You should do this. There's almost always a shame construct. So if you love me, you will. That's a shame statement. So it's a manipulation. Again, going closely associated with that is controlling situations. I always have to be in control. In fact, personally, that is something that I've struggled with my entire life. The need to be in control of a situation represents our fear that in and of itself, if we are not in control, things will go bad for us. They will impact us negatively. We will be found in a space that we don't want to be found in. And so we try and take control of those situations. One of the things that happens very much in a work environment is the use of power constructs. So, and it happens in the family as well. You know, the old statement, you'll do it because I tell you to, that's a shame construct. That's an assertion of power. And you know, maybe there's situations that's acceptable. But the reality is, when there's positive relationships, it's not necessary to reach for power constructs. I'm the boss. You'll do what I say. I have the advantage. I have the upper hand. Those are shame constructs. And very closely related, the need to micromanage. So an employer that is intimately involved in every detail of what the employee does is wrestling with shame. They don't know it, but they are so terrified of failure that they cannot release people to actually do the task that they've been commissioned to do, because they're terrified that things will fail. The fear of failure is a major shame construct. There's a couple of others that are worth noting. The use of medication and addictions. They go hand in hand. Now, the medication might be actual medication, but I'm using medication in the idea of that which causes me to feel better about myself, and out of that medicating process comes the addiction. Do you know everything that we do will either fit into a category of wanting to feel better about ourselves or medicating the pain of feeling worthless? You can pretty much put every willful action into one of those two categories. And the last one, I don't think it'll take much explanation, but it's a shame construct, and it is rage. Even road rage is actually an expression of shame. So somebody cuts me off in the highway. Actually, what happens internally is I say to myself, that person thinks they're better than me. We may convince ourselves that we're reacting because of a danger situation, in which case that's about fear and being out of control. But as often as not, it's about feeling devalued by somebody cutting us off. And so the rage in response is actually trying to take control of the situation. So rage is very much a part of the shame constructs. So hopefully in those 5 contexts, and identifying that list of representations, actions of shame, you'll be able to see where you fit in this whole struggle, this whole process. Which brings us down to the solutions for shame. And I'm going to wrap it up next week by doing my best to clearly express where shame ultimately comes from, and where and how to ultimately respond to it. But in order to recognize what an effective response looks like, it's important to notice 2 things. Again, that shame is an identity construct, and it is a relational construct. It's an identity construct. It tells me who I am and what I'm worth. It's a relational construct because shame almost always is in terms of relationships and expressed by the idea of what that other person thinks of me, or what I fear they might think of me. So it's a relational construct and it's an identity construct, and that leads to the solution. The solution is love. The solution is being in environments where we are loved. Love, relationships, actually responds to shame. It actually brings the healing of shame. Nothing else will heal from shame effectively apart from love. And so what love does is enables us to be ourselves and experience worth in and of ourselves, and therefore not need those coping mechanisms that we will often use. So a person might respond, but I don't have anybody that loves me. Well, there are two things that we need to do with that. First of all, that's a shame comment itself. But secondly, in order to experience love, we have to be the one that loves. And that's where the idea of love and worth going hand in hand comes in. I actually respond to a person by showing them their worth. That creates love for them. And in response, as we value and love others, they will love us in return. And a very, very significant piece of that is vulnerability. Remember, you go back way those weeks ago, vulnerability is an essential part of a love relationship. So I start to show who I am. The reason why vulnerability is so important is because of shame. So we're afraid that we won't be accepted. So we're not vulnerable. We're afraid we'll be rejected. We're afraid people will use that information and hurt us. And so we aren't vulnerable. But when we reach out to others, love them, value them, and become vulnerable, we create the context in which shame is responded to. So that's the creation of the relationships, and it's revealing who I really am. It's showing what my identity really is when I am acting in love and vulnerability and valuing others. That's the key to responding to shame. Next week, I'm going to unpack that a lot further. And I hope you'll join me then for that number 26, that 6th month of the Walk in the Garden. See you then.